welcome to everybody who came out on this rainy morning. I'm Mary Ann Nathan with the Conservation Commission, and our members here today are Wendy Batson and Nancy West and Deirdre Strachan and Abby Roach and Abby Westbury, who is one of our longtime supporters, and Ann Caldwell. And who did I miss? Jamie. Right here.
Margaret, too.
And Margaret. I'm going to turn the program over this morning to Jamie. He's going to start it with that.
My name is Jamie Hark. I'm with the Conservation Commission, and I'm really excited to invite you all here to learn about the power of plants this morning. So this is the third lecture that we have done in our WaterWise series since last fall, building on a lot of the really amazing foundational work that the Conservation Commission has been doing for years on this subject. But in September, we had guest speaker Jessica Meeks from Maine Geological Survey give a lecture here talking about the bedrock condition in town, the fractured bedrock aquifer that we have, and kind of demystify where we get our water from in town, talking about how different water sources are available in different parts of the town based off of different geology. We then built upon that in an October 30th lecture where we talked about how we can be water wiser and how we can focus more on preserving Harpswell's water supply, what we can do in our own homes with our dishwashers, with our toilets and things like that. So I'm on the Conservation Commission. I'm also a landscape designer and a resilience planner. My day job is with Viewshed. It's a landscape architecture and planning and GIS firm out of Yarmouth. I also have a new LLC, Mainland Design, where I'm doing some mapping, drone photography, and small landscape projects in town too. Also do work with the Land Trust, really happy to have them here, and yeah, I'm a proud member of the Harpswell community. I live over on Allen Point. So this graphic has been shown in several other presentations. Mary Ann and Nancy presented this at the Maine Water and Sustainability Conference, but basically, to break things down very generally, as far as water in town goes, there's about 5,000 residents in Harpswell who typically use about 55 gallons per day of water. So about 275,000 gallons are withdrawn from the aquifer daily, and that doubles to about 550,000 gallons in the summer. So we are kind of about to cross into that threshold as we welcome back some of our summer residents. So about 46 inches of precipitation falls in Maine annually. Given climate change, given the variability of everything, that has been subject to change, but we're going to stick with that 46 inches for these purposes. And Harpswell receives about 14.5 trillion gallons of precipitation annually, which is a lot of water. And so it begs the question, well, why do we often have water scarcity? Why in certain parts of town do we not have access to water? 80% of this water is lost through runoff, which is about 50%, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, and through evapotranspiration, so evaporation from the sun and transpiration from plants. So first, to kind of launch all of this, before we get to the plants, we're going to talk about how do we address runoff on our properties. And so we have to talk about Harpswell. It's an incredibly unique geography, very, very thin peninsulas that are very steep on either side. And so when you think about water being able to hit the surface and kind of percolate down through the ground and reach that bedrock aquifer, this is a tricky environment for getting that water available to us with our wells. It's also an incredibly steep coastline, so we kind of have neighbors on neighbors stacked up hills, which means that water moves fast through our properties, and what we're doing uphill impacts our neighbors below. And in some neighborhoods and areas of town, we have a real incredible density. So when you think of those numbers of how much we're drawing from our wells, when you have an area like this is Potts Point, I mean, that's a lot of houses taking from a pretty wild bedrock aquifer below. So for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to talk about how fast runoff, water moving really quickly off your site, is a little bit more problematic. It can lead to erosion. So let's say you have kind of a little creek or a gully, and as that water moves faster and faster and faster, it's going to pick up more sediment, it's going to eat away more at the soil, and then when that goes over the top of bluffs, over the side of hills, it's going to cause even more erosion and exacerbate the issue. And because of that, because the water is moving so fast, it's not infiltrating down into the soil. It's kind of just running straight off your site. And without that infiltration, it's not getting into the groundwater, it's not replenishing the wells. So slow runoff, we could say, is a little bit more beneficial. We can recharge our wells as the water moves more slowly through the site, and it's also really great for soil and plant health, just having access to water. I mean, we know that droughts do come, and kind of having a slower moving water on your site and having a better growing season where there's more ample water is better when maybe that water dries up later in the season. So stopped runoff, so let's say we want to just put ponds on our site or things like that, that's a little bit more tricky. And so I think the big caveat, and I'm sure a lot of you as Harpswell residents will say, well, I have too much standing water on my site. That's already an issue. I don't want to deal with that. And you're absolutely correct. We're generalizing 216 miles of coastline, a crazy diverse town. And so a lot of times you have a really shallow soil depth to bedrock, which means that the water really can't percolate down and it just stays more at the surface. And that leads to issues of mosquitoes, which we all know, so I'm not advocating for everybody to make their properties into mosquito breeding grounds, believe me. But it can also lead to some really nice site features as well. So 4 quick runoff prevention tips. The direction of water, moving water where you want it to go, what's more beneficial. Level spreading, avoiding straight lines, and increasing friction. So first, directing water. These are 2 terms. As you kind of move this land around on your property, you can berm up. So basically you can build up the land and that can help water shed away from the top of that slope, or you can swale down. And so a lot of people kind of install swales on their properties that will basically be like channels to just direct water away from features. A lot of times when you're building a home on a steep slope, it's advisable to put a swale in just to direct water away from your house. Level spreading, so this is a quick diagram. It's a top down, so looking at a top of slope, and then down to the ocean. Imagine you're flying over it. So a lot of problems occur when water is being directed to very specific points. And so if it's going over the bluff, over that top of slope in just a couple locations, it's going to cause a lot of erosion in very isolated places. So one tool that you can do is to basically do a very shallow swale, basically pick up water all in one place so that it can overflow as it gets higher evenly, so that you don't have isolated little rivulets that are causing more erosion. And then there's the idea of avoiding straight lines. Water does not like to move in straight lines. When you kind of look at a stream or a river from above, it kind of meanders based off of the topography, the vegetation, the bedrock quality. But we as humans love putting water in straight lines. I mean, think of the pipes, think of the culverts, things like that. And so what happens when you put water in a straight line is it accelerates. It gets faster and faster and faster and faster. And we know from fast moving water that that's not necessarily beneficial. It can cause a lot more erosion. And so gentle, more naturalistic meander is always going to slow water down and be beneficial. And then there's this idea of increasing friction. If you ever want to impress an engineer, talk about the Manning's N coefficient, but you also don't have to pick up on this. But basically the idea is that the roughness of the surface of your property impacts how fast water flows. So in red, so developed open space or barren land or herbaceous or hay pasture or roads, water moves really quickly. And so I think a lot of people have lawns where they think, well, it's green, it's planted, it should be slowing down water, but lawns, especially on steep slopes, really do act as a highway for water to move really fast. Whereas deciduous forest or shrub and scrub areas, they slow down that water. They literally create friction to stop the water from moving as fast. So you have a mowed lawn condition, but then maybe you let that lawn grow in a little bit. Maybe there's a little bit more of a meadow condition, a prairie condition. Gets a little bit better. Shrubland, a little bit better. And then finally, woodland is obviously the most ideal. And what we now know is that as water slows down, with all this friction, more of it then enters the aquifer. It stays on your property, it recharges your well, gives you something to drink. So, this is a good intro for the power of plants. And so we all learned about photosynthesis at one point in our lives, some of us not yet, and I apologize, it's rough. And the Calvin cycle and the Krebs cycle and all that, and that's not what I'm talking about here. It's amazing, that's also a power of plants. But I'm talking about these 6 categories when we're talking about the power of plants as far as being beneficial for water on your site. So the first is filtration, that plants will actually help filter basically things that we don't necessarily like in the water. So think about water moving off of a road that's going to have some oil in it, that's going to have particulates in it, sometimes heavy metals. Plants can uptake those materials into them and therefore take it out of the water supply and take it out of the soil as well. They create shade, which is really important. We saw that evapotranspiration figure, that as they cool the ground, less water is evaporating out of there. And it also creates a really nice habitat and it cools the water on your site, which is very beneficial. We talked about friction, slowing down water just from the sheer mass of being in the way. And then talking about root systems, infiltration, the roots will actually move soil particles apart, which will support water moving through the soil down. So if you have very compacted soil, first of all, it's probably not the best thing to plant in. If you can kind of uncompact that, that's better. But even when it's still a little compacted, plant roots can support that a bit. Stabilization, we've all kind of seen, especially after last year's storms, these root systems that are just holding rocks in place. And they really have this ability to hold soil and larger materials in place. And then absorption, the root systems themselves, the leaves as well, but mostly the roots take up a lot of water. So if you have a real wet patch of soil in your property, there are species that you can plant in there that will take up some of that water. So what does that look like in practice? Starting on the right, you could put a planted road buffer that could kind of screen, first of all, screen the cars, screen some of the sounds and the lights, but it could also screen some of the particulates that are coming off of the road. You could have, maybe you already have a grass swale that's directing water away on your site, or a rain garden, but you can plant those and you can really fill them with amazing, amazing plants. In front of your house, not only does it beautify the property itself, but you can kind of have plants as a buffer there as well. And then kind of on the shore side, putting plants at the top of your slope to kind of control that runoff, to kind of absorb a lot of that water before it enters that steep slope is really fantastic. And then there's this idea of kind of planting right at the very top of your bluff, creating a buffer. Because as we know with erosion, if this is the slope and the coast now, that will eventually move backwards. So having strong, mature root systems at the top of your slope will support further, or prevent further erosion later. And then, we can talk more about this later, but actually planting on your slope is incredibly helpful. And not every slope allows for this, but the ones that do, it does a really, really good job of holding the material together. So thinking about plants, and this is the cost savings part of it, which should be the most popular, that we all liked when we go to our nurseries, when you're putting in a new planting project, everybody likes that nice, mature, big, expensive tree that's like already maybe 3 inches around, looks like a lollipop, it's fantastic, and so day one it looks like you have a great landscape in. I'm here to say that starting smaller is not only going to save you money, when you're actually at the nursery, but they tend to grow a bit faster because they're a little bit more adaptable. So the metaphor is kind of, if you took a newborn baby and you took a grown adult and you put them into a new environment, the baby is going to adapt a little bit better. It doesn't know other things. It can grow with the environment. And because Harpswell is such a harsh environment with the salt spray and the waves and the rock, that's kind of preferred rather than the adult that's like, I know what I'm doing. I was raised in a nursery, I'm perfect. And then you put it in the ground in Harpswell on the top of the bluff and it's like shocked, it's freaked out, it doesn't do well. So that when you take a few growing seasons out from that, the cheaper one, the smaller one, can often grow a lot faster and kind of eclipse the larger one that you start with. And this is something that you can take when you go to the nursery, that there's other alternatives to just getting your big containers or getting your big saplings. You can get tree whips, which are tree saplings that are kind of no more than like 4 feet tall, very small and spindly. Live stakes, which is taking cuttings from dormant branches and literally just sticking them into the ground. That's one of my favorites. You can do bare root plants as opposed to containers. You could do grass plugs. A lot of times for like cord grasses or more sensitive grasses on the coast, the plugs do really well. Or you can just start from seed, which is, if you've prepped the soil and you kind of have the time for the maintenance, you'll do really well with that. And the other concept is just to think local. A lot of us have bigger properties with a lot of successful plants already growing on them. And the cheapest thing that you could ever do is just transplant what's already there. And so to take the plants that are thriving, and after last year's storms, for those of you living on the water, or I mean, we're all very close to the water, look what did well. Some plants really could handle those storms a little bit better. And so for those of you with property that have these plants on them, you can transplant them. They usually do better. Now it's a little bit too late. You really will put them into shock now that they're starting to really grow. But it's an idea. I know Tim's going to talk a little bit more about how you can transplant trees, but just something to consider. And so, Conservation Commission, we've put together several guides for the specific plants that you can look for. It's usually a good starting point. Every nursery has a different stock. It really just depends, but we do have those resources available. And then I also want to tease that in the fall, we're going to be tackling a lot more shoreline erosion specifics. And so plants are just one side of it, but there's a lot of different ways to think about how we can go about shoring up. And so definitely stay tuned for that. It's going to be a really, really interesting one. Thank you so much.